workshop that Cecy and Rosita were willing to help us out with on restorative justice. No, um, I have to admit, I don't know Cecy for a whole lot of time. We met due to certain circumstances that took place when monuments were coming down and all of that. No, and so, but I've been very impressed with them and as part of CESOSS and as part of our community and as part of the groups that we're entertaining, that we're uh, organizing, I think is necessary for us to understand some of these terms, like this one, restorative justice, simply because that's what we need to do. No, we have to, in my view, in my very humble view, we have to become active in understanding how we can actually offset some of the issues that are affecting our communities. No, and so one way of doing that is to get all mad and start fighting and screaming and all of that. But the other way is to become educated and use tools that exist in our disposal, not only to advance our communities in any way that we see fit, but also to become knowledgeable and have this and use these resources. So our healing is not just about fighting, it's about making it better for us, for our families, and for the futures to come. And so initially we had intended to do this for a group of young people that are mentoring under a program called CEACAT. But these topics are very important for our communities, for us to only restrict it to a few people. So we open it up to the community, and we expect to continue doing that as a way to amplify in our understanding about how we can utilize these tools to move forward in some of the work that is taking place in our community. And so I thank you everyone for participating, taking time out of your Fridays. And here is Cecy.
Thank you. Thank you. So I am Cecy Barffuson Franco. I am from Mexico. I lived so far almost half of my life. Well, I'm always half and half in here and half in the United States. I did all my studies in psychology and stuff, license and everything over there in Mexico, and then I came here and I learned English, and I pursue my master's in social work, and I've been practicing social work and school social work for about 8 years. Yes. With a license, and non-licensed I have more years since I work with Children, Youth and Families Department, and also at Old Face Receiving Home, which it was agency working with families who had been involved with Children, Youth and Families, CYFD. And then prior to that, I was working at a school. So I had to be trained in restorative practices. So there's different things out there about restorative justice, okay? I am going to now share a view with a PowerPoint so we can start telling you. And then, sorry, here, I just need to go to, here it is, so you guys can see it. All right, so restorative practices, that's how people sometimes talked about it, okay? There is a whole organization, agency that trains people. It is kind of pricey, but they have very good trainings. And that's the one that I went to. And they have these trainings all over actually the world. This organization is worldwide, and but they offer trainings here and there, and it's a very intense training. I went to a 5-day training all day, so every day from 8 hours for 5 days, because you have to do this in order, if you wanted to, well, implement things and continue having a certification so you can be a trainer if you want to. So that's how they mention it. They say restorative practices because it's a way that you're going to deal with conflict. It's a practice to restore whatever was destroyed or modified or interrupted. Also, it talks, but this restorative practices comes from restorative justice. That's why sometimes people call it restorative justice, because it starts from that concept. So, but one of the things I want you guys to like pay attention and get your mind around it is to be restorative means to believe that decisions are best made and conflicts are best resolved by those most directly involved. So whenever a conflict happened, the people who got affected and the people who committed whatever the offense, those two organizations, those two people, those two families, the community, they have to be involved to figure out how to solve it. Nobody's going to, this is the concept that no one is going to come and solve your problems. You do it, okay? Because we need to restore whatever happened, whatever conflict happened, you need to restore community, you need to restore relationships. And that's what they talk here about. The restorative practices movement seeks to develop good relationships and restore a sense of community in an increasingly disconnected world. This was like 3 years ago when I did this training and everything. And now more than ever, right, it's easy to be disconnected because first of all, for safety, we kind of have to be distanced from each other. And we will see a lot more disconnection in our communities. So these practices looked and values relationships. Okay, that's the core. Anything that you're going to do, you want to restore that relationship, you want to make connections with people, with, let's say, organizations, with communities. So that is what, if you want to implement, if you want to change and shift to this idea, you have to like internalize this to you, right? Like when you have a conflict, you want to get with the person, trying to figure out, to make a relationship, to figure out what happened and how to solve it. And that way you create some connections. So one of the things that they talk about too, because this is all about restore whatever was broken. Okay, let's say somebody stole something from your house, and it's within the community. You want to say, okay, I'm hurt. I feel now my safety is not there anymore, right? I violated, there's so many violations about that and how it sends. And then, so what they talked about restorative justice, how they implemented in other countries was, so there's all these problems with teenagers getting into delinquency and then just giving them a punishment, right? Just giving them a punishment with no support. So that's what they tell you here, too punitive, no support, and then the kids were not learning, they were destroying the relationship and they did not feel part of that community anymore. And really the person who got affected did not receive, it took a long time to create safety again, the trust was destroyed. And so what they started doing is giving examples of how to get the person who got affected, let's say somebody tagged a house, somebody spray painted a window, whatever, and then they got this the people who did it, and they make a circle, and then they said the person who suffered the incident, right? She or he is going to say how they feel and how that makes them feel and what happened and all the feelings and things surrounding that, and what is their expectation. How will they get restored? What is it they need? For example, they'll say, in order for me to feel that things are okay, in order for me to feel better, I need this from this person who did the harm. So, and then the person who did the harm has to say, okay, this is the reason why I did it, and I, I hear what you're saying, and I guess I'm willing to do A, B, C, and D, and they come out to a conclusion. I'm just giving you a very quick summary. So for you, when I explain this, you have like a context. So restorative justice goes around here. They're going to be high support, encouragement, and nature. Remember, you're going to be supportive. You're going to be encouraged, but you're not going to be neglectful or permissive. You're not going to say, oh, that's okay that you stole something. That's fine. Don't worry. We'll move on. No, that's permissive. You don't hold the people accountable. So that's not what restorative justice is. Encouragement and nurture is, you can do it. You can fix. How do you think you can fix this? How can this be fixed, the thing that you did? What are the things that you're willing to do? So that's why it's encouragement and nature. And I can help you go here and there and support you on you being accountable, on you restoring the peace. And then it's also not punitive. It's not like, oh, we're going to throw you in jail and we're just going to like get you. And because that is not, it's about harming, right? It's about punitive. It's not about education, and it's not about restoring the peace. And because in order to restore the peace, you have to have the two people together, the one that received the harm and the one who committed the harm, right? So that is where we want to be. We want to be high in expectations, consequences, the line that we have to be very clear. There's no maybe yes, maybe no with restorative justice. You either commit or not commit to do something. That's where it's high control. You're going to get into an agreement and you have to say yes or no, and you have to do it. Right? There's no like, well, maybe tomorrow you're going to put deadlines. You're going to say, this is what I'm willing and I'm going to start tomorrow, or at 5 p.m., all that type of stuff. So this is important to remember when you look at figuring out how to solve a conflict or whatever is happening, that somebody destroyed the harmony of whatever happened in a community or in a relationship, even a relationship within families. Now, other things that they talk about, this is more from the restorative justice, is about the questions that you can ask. So when you get together, and this is all in circles, and I'll talk a little bit more about circles, but when you get together, somebody is going to be the moderator, right? Somebody who has nothing to do with any of the parties, and they're going to ask, who has been hurt? What are their needs? Whose obligations are this? Who has a stake in this situation? And what is the appropriate process to involve stakeholders in an effort to put things right? So different ways of restorative justice and restorative practice have different questions, but this is one coming from the people that implemented this in the criminal justice, right? So we have to figure out who got hurt, what do they need now, what are the obligations of the other person, which other people are involved and were affected. That's who has a stake in the situation. Okay, who's going to either get affected more, involved in all this, and who are the appropriate people that we can get together to come up with solutions for restorative justice. Okay, so for example, like again, there is a person who committed a crime against another person, and then you're going to have to invite whoever committed the crime and their support system. Okay, and then you invite the victim or whoever. I'm trying to move away from victim because victim sometimes brings a connotation of there's no power in a victim. You can't be someone who somebody committed a crime against you, but you still have power, right? So that's why I kind of walk away from saying victim. So whoever got affected, they have to come, and also their support system or whatever else people needs once has a stake on whatever situation that happens, right? So and then another things of restorative justice here, it says everything is about what it will take to make things right again, right? So it addresses the obligations. It focuses, remember, about high control, high standards, high consequences, because we have to talk about what are the obligations and what are the things that we need to take care of. If somebody broke my window, I don't need that person sometimes to go to jail. I need my window fixed like tomorrow. So who is going to do that, right? So it involves the stakeholders, victims, offenders, and communities. So everybody is there, focuses on harm and needs. So we need to talk about what was the harm and what are the needs. So whoever committed the harm, they have to say, I did this, and because they have to hear the person who was affected and their feelings and what changed their lives, what kind of stuff they had to do now because of the crime against them was committed. And then the person who committed it has to say, well, I did this because of this. Because some of the questions that you have to ask to them is, what were you thinking when you broke a window? And then they have to say, so how do you feel after you broke a window? And then they have to say it. And then you say, and now that you hear this person telling you, how do you feel now? What kind of things can you do to make things right or make things better? So it's inclusive, collaborative in the process. So we all going to work together. And obviously, this is all about respect. So we're not going to be talking about blaming. So this is not about blaming. Because of you, I feel like this. You're going to say, because we're going to walk away from accusing people and like focusing on the person. You're going to focus on the action. Because my window is broken. Now my house is cold and I have glass all over, and I cut my feet the day that the window was broken. Then I did not go to work because I had to figure out what to do with that window. Like, you're not going to say, because of you and what you did, you're a piece of whatever, and I hate you. No. So that's why at the very bottom here, it talks about respect. So we are going to focus on the action and how each other people felt. Like, for example, they talk a lot about I statement. They say, I felt violated. My house is no longer feels safe because I have a big window that it's obviously somebody broke into. My sense of security is gone. I cannot sleep well. So it's all about you and how you feel. It's not going, you're going to say, you made me, you did this. So we are not talking about that, right? So here are some examples of effective questionings too. Affective means that is about emotions and feelings and how everything happened affected you. So you're going to talk about the situation, what happened, and then when there's a challenging behavior or whatever happens, you can ask what happened. Okay, what happened? Just explain to me what happened. You're not going to say, what did you do? What's wrong? So just no things like that. You're just going to talk about the objective situation, what happened. And then you can say, what did you think when you realized what had happened? And that's the people who received the harm, right? You can ask them, what do you think when you realized what had happened? Well, I thought that this was the end of my life or whatever. How do you feel when that happened? And then what do you think when people who affected, right? People who committed whatever things against the other person, you can say, what do you think you need to do to make things right? So you're not, whoever is collaborating with this, nobody is going to give answers. The only people who's going to commit to something is the people who received the harm and the people who committed the harm. So the ideas are going to come from there. They're going to like technically solve your own problems and figure out what are you willing to do. And then the people who got affected is, what do you think needs to happen to make things right? So those two questions come together and then you figure out a plan. So after you get answers and you get some agreements, right? Okay, so I need my window to get fixed. It needs to be within a week because whatever. And then the person will say, the other person can say, okay, well, I don't know how to fix a window. And then somebody else supports, say, okay, we can teach you, we'll let you do it, and we can teach you, and then you can start working on the window. Starting on Monday or whoever, I'm just giving this example. I mean, things are going to be different for every situation. So here is a model to start, like how to start using this. You can start always by modifying the way you talk to people, the way you interact with people with effective statements. Like, what happened? What do you need? Every time that you yell at me, every time when you're yelling and you're raising your voice, I feel like you don't appreciate me. And my trust for you is not here. Like, it's all about an action and how it makes you feel. And then what do you think? What can we come into an agreement to fix something? So you can start doing effective statements like that. Another thing you can use is the effective questions. Like, I just give you some examples and I'll talk to you a little bit more about the questions. And then a small improv conference. When a conflict happens, even within your house, when a conflict happens, you can say, okay, gather together, be in a circle. what happened? And then you get people a turn to talk and then figure out how to come out to a solution. And then you either can have things like group circles if you want to. So you can have groups or you can call it circles. Now, circles, a lot of the restorative justice ideas also come from indigenous people because they use circles, right? The talking stick. That's how they organize and figure out together as a community. So this is something that has been part of indigenous groups, how to solve problems and figure out as a community how to fix them. And then you can do a formal conference. It doesn't have to be a circle. You have a moderator and figure out and get everybody involved. So the community circles, you can make some things like that, just at check-ins. You can meet with people like monthly and do circles and just talk about very simple thing. Okay, just to create, because remember all the way in the back, we talk about the fundamentals of this is relationships. So community circles is about building wherever a relationship that you need to have. So you can start creating something very mundane, like I give you an example here, which is, mundane. It's not, but you can start creating circles about saying, how is the community going? What other things to celebrate, right? Updates in the community, even in your family, right? When you gather and have dinner and then you can all talk about what has happened in your life today and things like that, because that continues to build community and respect when we all are able to share. So here, when I share the classroom values and expectations and norms, you can't always, anytime that you create groups or circles or figure out to solve an issue, the first thing that you need to do is to set your expectations and your rules. So what I wanted to review with you guys, it's about here. It's about the circles, and I'm going to stop sharing very quickly here. Oh, never mind, it's here. So, and I'll explain to you about this book, but one of the things about restorative justice or restorative practices is circles. The reason why they like circles is because no one in a circle has the power. We are all facing each other and nobody is on the top of a table or in the bottom, on the sides. Everyone has power and it has the ability to talk. That's why circles is more what restorative justice and restorative practices use. Because this is not about overpowering anybody or being punitive, remember? So that's why it's recommended to use circles. And it's recommended always to have a moderator when it's something formal or the harm is kind of big. To have a moderator, so that person is going to set some rules and expectations about the meeting and what is going to be the outcome. Because one of the things that we always have to remember when we do restorative practices is we need to focus on the solution and how are we going to restore and continue to build relationships. So that moderator has to say, we are here to come with solutions and to come to an agreement so we can restore the peace. That's our goal. We are not, obviously, usually when you do things like that, it's not, sometimes people do it, but it's not recommended to say, we're not here to blame people. No, you said what you want and what are the expectation, and people just focus on that behavior. And we are going to talk respectfully. You set the expectation. We don't have to say, nobody's going to say the F word here. We don't want to be in a negative. We just want to focus on the expectation. when you set ground rules for restorative justice. Now, this book here, if you guys want to learn more or even have something handy, it is very cheap. It's $4. Well, $5. It's $4.95. And you can get it. And some of the pictures that I put are from this book. And this person was one of the founders of restorative justice. And they started practicing some of it in Australia. So these are the two books and references that I got. This is the one that I just showed you, Restorative Justice, Little Books, of Justice and Peace Building. You can just research it, and it's pretty cheap. Now, this Restorative Practices Handbook for teachers, disciplinarians, and administrators, this is something that I acquired from the training that I went, but this is the Institute, International Institute for Restorative Practices. This is the one, if you Google it, and they have some videos on YouTube and where they show how they use circles with people, and how they, the trainings that they offer and things like that. But they also have, the videos of circles, so you can look and see, oh, how do you do the circles again? And you can go and see it from this institute, International Institute for Restorative Practices. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing. Okay. Here, and I just want to say again, this is not new. Restorative practices is not a new thing. It has been around. It comes really from the indigenous people. That's how they solved their issues long time ago, right? They created circles. They used to talk to each other. They will get people involved, and they will build relationships. What happens now with these restorative practices and restorative justice is that now it got more like steps and guidance. And then people started seeing how it affected in the schools, how the disciplines and the suspensions and all that was going down when you build relationships, when you create peaceful communications, and you offer people who did the harm, you offer the opportunity for them to restore instead of just punishment and never seen them again. And then also in the criminal justice, there was a lot of people, well, different countries had different issues, but gangs and stuff like that. That's in Ireland, that's what they did. They used restorative justice because there were parts in the community who were at each other, and it wasn't going to work, the police. I mean, it wasn't working for many years. So they started doing restorative justice and building meetings and circles and figuring out how people can restore the peace within their community. And they started seeing actually the people who received the harm felt better, because actually the thing that they needed was was changed. They needed for the person to say, I'm sorry. They needed for the person to go and fix all the destruction that they did at their home immediately, not just go and send them to jail. Because how is that going to fix my harm, my sense of safety? Yeah, that person's going to be in jail, but my house is still destroyed. Nobody's going to pay for that. So then that's how it started to be so popular now, because it actually both parties get benefit from. You have the person who affected the harm connected to their community again and feeling part, instead of feeling, oh, I'm the criminal, nobody likes me, so I'm going to keep destroying whatever it is. And then the person who received the harm never feeling that they're safe again, or feeling like this is not good. I hate everybody. And then there's no relationship. There's a break in the community. So that's why I believe in restorative practices. And that's what I do. The reason why I had to go over there and do a training is because I'm charged of discipline in my school. And we needed to decrease suspensions because they never work. Teacher said, they never work. They come back and like nothing. They feel no shame and blah, blah. So, and that's what I do all the time. Anything and something happens, and with even the little ones, kindergartners, I always say, okay, what happened? Well, blah, blah, he, whatever, stole my candy. Okay, and then I tell the other kid, so what happened? What did you do? Well, I took the candy because it was there, blah, blah. So they start talking and they come up with their own solutions, like little ones. And I'm like, okay, good. So I don't have to do anything besides organizing their state. Sometimes sometimes people don't have, which it can happen. Sometimes people don't have an idea, like what do they need to feel better? And or the other person doesn't know, well, I don't know what to do. So you can say, well, do you want me to give some options out there and you guys can pick? That can be too, because sometimes people get too close, but usually, especially in communities and adults, they will always know what they need, right? And people will know what they did and what they can offer. I'm just talking about with little ones, sometimes they don't. And then one of the things also I never like for them to say, or anybody to say, is when people say, I'm sorry I did this. This is how I'm going to fix it. And then the other person said, that's okay. No, you don't say that's okay. You say, please don't do it again, because it really hurt my feelings. So I always teach the kids, don't say that's okay, because it's like, oh yeah, it's okay that you slap me. That's okay. You say sorry. No, please don't do it again, because that really hurt me. But I'm glad that now we can be friends again. So, things like that we can use either general bigger or in your family or within your community. So now I'm going to take you to do a breakout room. Okay.
We're back.
Just want to say, Jorge, yes, please include me into those groups. I need guidance.
That's okay. I'm not the best known to clear about the breakout rooms. I always panic with that and I don't know what to say. So do you, who wants to speak first for whatever group you raise your hand, and then we can start with that person. Okay, Javi, yeah, so.
Yeah. So I just figured I'd go first, that way I don't forget what we talked about. So it was kind of interesting because I think we had brought up kind of similar scenarios, where like he said, she said kind of things, just different conflicts in our lives, where drama kind of rises up. And I mean, very clearly, in all those different situations, you could see how taking the time to sit down and talk with one another and implementing the community circle would be helpful, just in terms of clearing the air. And even if you agree to disagree, having the closure of understanding where the other person's coming from. And it was kind of interesting because then the conversation kind of led into, like, if this is such a simple way, to like you just talk about your issues, and you acknowledge the other person, like, how like why don't we do that as much, and so we started talking about Western culture and kind of how that's built up against this idea of like sitting down and talking about an issue and that whole idea of conflict resolution, but just talking about how like whenever you look at like British colonialism, you know, and I think just kind of there are some European cultures in general, you know, that can be a little bit colder, you know, just in the sense of you don't talk about, you know, issues as much, you know, you don't talk about conflicts, you don't talk about emotions as much, you know, and so a lot of that stuff is kind of avoided. And so that's maybe one of the things that leads to kind of where we are in our society today, you know, where it can be hard to talk about these things, even though the answer or the solution is right in front of us. And then another thing that we talked about was this idea of how sometimes people don't necessarily want the best for the person in front of them, you know, or the person that there's a conflict with. And kind of what that led to was this idea of like Western individualism, you know, where there's maybe a lack of sense of community. And because of that, you know, you don't feel as connected to the person next to you, and you might not care as much about, you know, their well-being, you know, and making sure that they're okay, kind of in that dynamic of conflict resolution. And so that's kind of where our conversation went.
Great, thank you. So I know Andrea wants to go.
Okay, I just want to apologize to my group because we didn't really pick a spokesperson. So I was with Pablo and Bianca. I think we had a lot more questions, but Pablo and I kind of missed the beginning, but Bianca kind of filled it in. So we talked about a family member. One of us had a family member who we felt was in trouble and that we were not supporting them enough, or because we're not. And another person felt that they were not having good communication with another family member. So we thought, well, we would sit down and say, I am feeling that we're not communicating well, and I would like to offer the following solution so that we can communicate better. And the other person would, the other person that had a problem with the not supporting would say, I feel that I'm not supporting you. I would like to do, you know, can I communicate and call you every Wednesday, and we could talk more on, and I could help you. But what would be, like the question was, if the other person resists those solutions, like, you know, says to you, well, I don't want to communicate with you. I'm doing fine. And or the person says, well, you really can't help me with my problem. It's my problem. So I'm just talking about in families, you know. And then I guess before, I mean, I'm just asking this question, before you decide to have this the conversation with the family member in this way and circle, that you would have to come up with several solutions, because if that person says, no, that's not a solution for me, I don't feel comfortable with that, and then you would just offer another one and say, well, then how about if we do it this way? So I don't know. Just a question is how you go about when the other person resists the solution part of it.
Yeah, and that it's always the question, right? It's all like, oh yeah, it's all kumbaya, everybody's going to figure out how to do. But no, I mean, you're going to right away, if it is like within two people in the family, you say, well, I don't agree with that, I don't feel comfortable doing that, and then you have to respect what they say. And then the other person who is affected or whatever is going to have to say, well, if we don't come to a solution or to an agreement, I will have to separate myself. And I don't really want that, because I want still a conversation with you. But if you don't feel comfortable, and then we have to respect where we are, right? Maybe in another time, days go by, a week go by, we can come back. Are you willing to come back and talk about it? Because remember, it's about respect. So we cannot push people. And usually when it's a community, when there's several people, the person who moderates is going to talk to the offender and whoever affected And then they're going to say, look, we're going to have this meeting and this is going to be the goal. Are you willing to be there
Oh, I see. Yeah.
to do it? But when it's a family member, and it's between in your houses, within your family, you're so close, you're going to have to respect where people are and then later propose, I respect what you're saying. It's your choice. My choice, because I'm going to feel like this. And for me, what I need is I'm going to have to separate myself for a while until we can figure out things. So when you're ready, we can come back together, because I can't satisfy my needs right now with what we
Mhm.
have. And the only way I can satisfy my needs is if we do some distance, we do this, or that's how we can respect and see the resistance. And sometimes people don't want to and they're not ready, and we cannot push it, right? We just can't, because and then it's going to create more conflict and more like, you're going to tell me what to do.
You don't get the chancla out and start hitting them on the head.
Tonto.
No,
I think somebody else mentioned that it would have been, if we would have read the book before this, we might have had more questions or more understanding or kind of get it. But
no, this is new.
but I'm interested in reading the book now so I can see more about it.
Yeah, it's a different thing. I mean, it's interesting to read it and have some background, because sometimes you forget. But once you get into the feeling, understanding, like, you're not going to talk about blaming. You're not going to. You're going to talk about, I feel like this. When you do this, I feel this. When I do this, this is what happens, and I need this, and I, and then the other person has to say, when I did this, I thought about this, and I did it because of this. So it's all about accountability and acknowledging what you have. But it's very good to read the book, though. So another group, because we had two, we have one person, another person.
Yeah, I'll go. My name's Gio, and I was with Jorge, Ana, y Monse. So we're taking the approach of how technically how to apply restorative justice in specifically institutional racism, and what we found was, it's like when Uncle Tom has the power, we feel that we don't have power in justifying ourselves in a certain harm that's been done to us or anybody racially. And so a lot of the things we were coming up with was just first, if with the institution, set a complaint. Set a complaint about the person that did the racist act, and then go about it that way. And then, but also, we were also thinking about, Jorge made a good point of going back and thinking differently. So it's like externalizing the issue and the aggression to solve what's been going on, but do it, so making it more personal, going to the person, letting the person know how, for example, me, I was felt. So I guess it's like at a personal level, using restorative justice to apply it with somebody. And then I was just thinking at an institutional level, I guess creating councils to fight against, the institution, which is, I liked what Javi said, was just like the Western societal thinking that has stripped us away from our communities and localizing together and taking our power back. And so I'm still trying to understand the idea of restorative justice, but I think that's kind of, I feel like, what we've gathered and what I feel like you're conveying to us.
Great, that's good. And I want to actually support, or I agree with the idea of what Jorge said. Sometimes, somebody says something and then we get all upset and then we continue our day. But part of being restorative, you kind of have to say, somebody says something and then you're going to have to say, hey, when you say that, it makes me feel discriminated. I don't know if that was your intention, but when you just said that, I felt that way. And see what happens, right? You're going to have to take your power and be able to say, you're not insulting anybody. You're not saying you are racist, because you know how people sometimes get all, oh, no, of course, no one in the world is racist now. But you can say, when you said what you said, I felt discriminated. I felt that you said it because it made me feel like you were saying something about my color, skin, or my race, or my culture. I don't know if that was your intention, but just I want to let you know, because that is about connecting with that person, right? And if that person goes like, oh, I don't know, whatever, and it's your working place or the institution, so then, you know, see from there, of course, if they get like aggressive or all that kind of stuff, and then you say, okay, sorry, back you up, I'm going to move on because I don't feel safe now. And then I'm going to go, and then you go to your other channels, but at least you're affected, because even when you get trainings about sexual harassment, they always tell you, you have to let people know, and you have to say you need to stop. Because for anything, are going to say, did they know? How did they know they were doing that? You didn't tell them. So it's about that, right? And then creating your own group and your own power, like you said. You already guys have your ideas, your councils, your communities, and then figure out how to tackle that.
Can I chime in? So there was another example that Anna told us about her own experience, no? And so it's within an institutional setting, right? So then the question is, how do we look for restorative justice within an institutional setting, right? And so one of the things that we discuss is that within, and it goes back to Uncle Sam, right? Under this notion of Uncle Sam, or under this notion of a larger structure that harbors peoples and opinions and ways of being that can be detrimental to other people, then the question is, well, how do we do that, right? And so, you know, part of what we discussed is that we have to also, I mean, to me at least, you know, and I don't know nothing about restorative justice, but to me, restorative justice, you know, should also mean, and I don't know if it does, but that you regain a sense of empowerment, right? Because when you confront somebody, you say, look, man, this is what you did, blah, blah, blah. You're also recovering and healing your own self. So then the question is, how do we that within the bigger structures? And I was, you know, and this is mostly coming from my experience working at UNM, is to actually go and confront the institution so they themselves can actually make the remedy, and we can pressure, you know, from the institutional setting for those injustices to not take any place. And by doing that, I believe that we can that we can also seek for larger understanding of restorative justice, so we can deal with this within institutional places where we might feel that, well, you know, it's just me. What can I do, right? Me against the professor, or me against whatever. But also regain or understanding that by finding a way to speak up and to correct that, perhaps not directly with the person, but with the institution, that we might be setting up for that thing not to happen to another person coming down the line. I wanted to make that.
That's a good idea. Did we miss someone else? Another group?
Yeah, I think we're, oh, sorry, this is Adriana.
Go ahead.
Oh. So I was in the group with Rosita and Bruno and Miss Sarah, right? So what we had discussed was, we introduced ourselves and kind of our background. And one of the situations that Bruno presented was in situations in schools where maybe there's a lot of violence, and bringing these rivaling groups together to discuss Was that accurate, Bruno? Can you hear me, Bruno?
You're on mute. Okay, there
Sorry,
you go.
guys, I thought I was unmuted. Pardon me. Yeah, that's accurate. I was saying that bringing together two groups, possibly to sit down and simply have a conversation is a big act of restorative justice. Maybe they feel wronged in a certain way and they don't necessarily comprehend the situation or what they've necessarily done. And just by giving them that space, by building that space, I should say, and giving them the opportunity to privately discuss the wrongdoing, enables them to heal.
Yeah, and then another conversation that came up, a situation where we would approach things in a more restorative manner. We discussed the current pandemic and the situation with students who are having to go to online learning with little or no, prior training, and parents and the teachers and everybody doing their best. But I use the example of my own daughter where she pretty much likes school, but she hates online learning. And even when the first closure kicked in March, we started struggling with me getting her to quote unquote comply and keep a schedule and everything. And this semester, her being in the 9th grade and high school kind of being a whole nother level of just, accountability and new learning and it being like not the ideal high school thing, like you don't get to be cool and be in the halls and see people in passing period and see your friends. And how I struggle with even just getting her to try to just do what she's supposed to in the beginning. It was very much like, here's your schedule, you better do it, blah, blah, blah. And her not feeling it. And then me finally getting to a point where it's like, you know what, go ahead, do whatever you want to do, what you don't want to do, just do your thing. Because as an adult, I think we all agree that this situation is already stressful. And I can imagine that for a teenager, it must be that much more, right? The added layer of like, oh God, I got to do this online. And then the external dynamics with the pandemic and what's happening in the world and the election. And my child, she's pretty free range. I try to let her be exposed to like, see the world for what it is and from different angles. But I also try to, instill her with an awareness of like social justice and history of our people as women, as people of color, as, GLBTQ members. And being just really, not candy coating and not protecting her, because I try to balance too with like not sending her unprepared to enter a world where the cards are not stacked in her favor, but also instilling her like, it's to your advantage to learn. But anyway, the thing we were discussing was how the school approached me to try to sign an attendance contract. And they said that it's by federal law, because I asked them, like, what's the point of this? They said, well, by law, we need to serve you with this, blah, blah. And I declined to sign it. I said, I'm going to decline to sign, because when I asked them, what's the purpose of this? And I said, they said, well, the federal government created this law to make sure that students don't fall behind their peers and that they're staying to their grade level. And by then I knew my daughter had taken these standardized tests, even now in the 9th grade, remotely, and seeing that she had scored not only among the higher scoring students in her school, but even on a national level. I said, so in this scenario, it doesn't apply, because she's not falling behind. On the contrary, she's at and above her grade level, even though she hardly participates. She only does what she likes, which is the dancing, the music, and the art, which is okay with me, because I'm like, as long as she's doing something. So it got to a point where we discussed how this punitive approach to sign this contract and, we're going to, report you to the authorities, and then add to that the layer in the news of how Bernalillo County Sheriff, for example, how APS or whoever somehow thought it was a good idea to give them the names of the students and their addresses who weren't attending online school regularly, and having cops going to people's homes, which I could see from the standpoint of there are some children that might be in danger, for all they know, they're not logging in because they're freaking dead, but overwhelmingly, I don't think that's the case. I think it's largely that kids are just not adapting well to this situation, on top of.
So this sounds like the school did not try to understand your perspective or build a relationship with you to see that how they can help you. They just wanted to be punitive. Remember in our thing, right?
cover their tails too, right? Because I like the school and I appreciate what they do. And I know everybody's having to adapt and you know, pretty much make the worst of a bad situation. But I also didn't feel like it was the most constructive intervention, you know? Because for me, I'm at a point where I'm like, you know what, if Quetzali has to repeat the 9th grade or she has to do night school in the 10th grade, et cetera, that's for me, that's like a small price to pay for her to just have peace of mind and mental health and self-care right now. So I'm like, you know, do what you like. You know, you want to play with your guitar, you want to dance, you want to go over there. Because in the meanwhile, I've taken it upon myself to try to keep the learning going, right? Because I have an with her. I've tried to be an involved parent with the limits that I have, even as a single parent and everything else that I'm trying to do. So really using, you know, this example of saying like, is putting kids caught up in the system that inevitably tends to lead our kids in our communities into the school to prison pipeline, the best answer for this situation. Even if we weren't in a pandemic, I don't agree that it's the best approach. So my whole thing is kind of like trying to negotiate and not have kids pay the price for failures that are outside of their control, be it this president that has poor response, or the limitations in our budget in the school, or the way that these structures have already been so embedded to create certain outcomes, right? Like the contract creates with jails that says you have to guarantee a certain minimum number of inmates in order for this contract to be fulfilled. So those types of things and the structural inequalities and the pretty much capitalistic prioritization of school and of punishment. Like, let's figure out a way to take people's vulnerabilities, the disparities that they've inherited over generations of racism, of poverty, of all these things that have compounded against the people who least need it, and let's turn them into a commodity, right? And I'm saying, no, you can't be that system, because if I knew she was failing, but like I said, fortunately, she's still making the grade, right? She's scoring. I'm like, I want her to learn. I want her to make it, but I'm also not just gonna like expect that she's just gonna be this obedient automaton, because that's not good for her either. I don't totally agree with the system, and I think there's problems with expecting our kids to just not question, comply, and let parents and expect us to just feeding our kids into the system where it's not like it wasn't created to empower them. So looking at it from the standpoint of like, instead of punishing the kids,
you have to work with them. Yes, and I can see that you make your choice already, right? I mean, unfortunately, whatever conversation happened with the school, you already made your choice to meet your needs. And if it's working, right? I guess we can go there. During this time, there's we have to build a lot of relationships and figure out, especially I work at the school, so I know some of that dynamic, and it's out of control. Our lives are chaos, and we have little to no control, but we need to be able to talk to each other and communicate and see what kind of things we can come up as an agreement. Now, Bruno, as part of what were you saying, lots of people, well, I'm not saying lots of people, but restorative justice was used a lot with gangs involvement, because sometimes that's what they need only. Sometimes they need to get together and talk, and it requires adults. They are not going to be afraid or having people together and have some agreements and set rules, and because sometimes that's what the only thing they want, and that will solve lots of issues and comes to agreements. Definitely, that's something that people have tried with involvement, gang involvement, and then parent and system. You know, like Adriana was saying, parent and the system, the school, trying to figure out to build a relationship to say, this is what I need, this is what I can provide. How can the school come to me into an agreement? How can we make an agreement and then see if it works, right? So
Sarah pointed to too about like, well, what about, and although we had a limited amount of time by that point, she, as an educator, I appreciate, you know, her perspective too. And if she would like to speak more about what she was pointing to in terms of like, have we tried, or had I tried, or the school, or what about trying to build a better communication and relationship about what are the proper interventions if we know that this contract or this just punishing the kids. And I'd like to encourage her if she would like. I think I'm getting your name correctly, right, Miss Sarah? Was that right? Miss Sarah? No? Hello?
Yeah, no, I don't want to take up too much time, but I was just thinking, I wish the school would offer you something like that, because obviously your daughter's needs aren't being met. And if the school could, you know, have someone like Cecy who could facilitate just a little meeting, you could do it on Zoom, I would imagine, to kind of do some problem solving around what's needed.
Yeah, I
Um,
think it's just
so-
like,
Go ahead, sorry, because Bruno wanted to comment on that. And then I have Monse who has another question.
My comment was just to say that I work at a Bandelier, and Bandelier gets a lot of resources. It's a school that's very well off in the Albuquerque area, and for me, the situation with schools is that it's a complete. Well, we're going back to Marxism, I think, right? 101 here, in the commodification of people, right? Turning people into the commodity. And it's really a relationship to class. And I think that's why at a lot of different institutions, educational institutions in particular, we don't have the model where we include parents because it's simply just to turn them into the object to receive funds, or the object to just, you know, keep the system moving, keep people paid, but not necessarily to produce quality citizenship.
And I mean, you can always ask for a meeting.
Yeah, you
always
can.
say, I want to have a meeting because I want my child to still engage in education, but I want to see how we can make it into an agreement. I don't think the school will ever say, no, we don't want to meet with you. We don't have time. I don't think so.
and I think in that situation, at that point, I said, look, you know what? Because they said if she doesn't like the online thing and she doesn't want to interact, she can just log on at her pace. She doesn't have to attend classes and this and that. I said, yeah, but how would she be able to do like her flamenco dance class and the guitar class and the art class that involves and requires these interactions? They're like, well, she wouldn't be able to. And I said, no, okay, I don't think that makes sense either, because if those are the only classes she's attending, why would you deprive her of the only things that she's actually doing? In that case, it's, you know, I'm just going to help her start training for her GED and she could do what I did. You know, I went to my counselor in high school and I asked about college, and unfortunately she said, this is very, very, very sad, which is part of the problem too. My counselor said, people like you are better fit for doing things with your hands. And I apologize, this is unprofessional, but what I looked at her and I told her, I was like, that doesn't sound right. And I told her, I was like, oh yeah, Miss Tien, you mean like this? And I threw her a finger and I laughed. And the next week I dropped out of high school in the 11th grade, went to study for my GED for 2 weeks. And I applied to UNM, and I was at a 4-year college when I would have still been in high school, you know? And those are all these structural things that I'm like, you know what? Especially the ones, that's why I like working with kids who people think they're the throwaways, they're the failures, like they're not gonna make it. I think they're care of those students, and I'm excited to be able to do this type of stuff with CESOSS too, and building the mentorships with youth and elders in our community. Kids have leadership skills. It's just the educational system is not designed or is not equipped, unfortunately, at this time, with as much money as we spend on it, to really draw out those traits. And I'm like, you know, these kids, they're not the throwaways, they're not the waste, and they're not the ones that we should be using to feed these contracts with jails. These are the kids who are going to be the leaders. If they're not fitting in, it's not because there's something wrong with them, because a lot of us might agree that what's wrong, there's nothing wrong with fitting into a dysfunctional system. That's actually a good thing, right? So
yes, and that's actually, sorry for interrupting, because I want to cover some of the other questions, but that's actually what is pushing, right? Is pushing things are going overall, and then some districts are required to apply restorative justice, restorative practices, and relationships, and then there's a lawsuit, Yassi Martinez, I think. So
That's right.
that started to change a lot of stuff because of what you're saying, Adriana, and lots of things are changing slowly, but are changing. Now, it doesn't mean that we as a community cannot push for that change faster, right? As long as we build our power. And Adriana, you sound like you have already lots of options in plans. So, hey, whatever works for you.
I don't know if it works, Cecy, pero ¿qué le vamos a hacer? All we can do is try, right?
Well, you definitely pointed a lot of options, and I'm just saying you can always request a meeting and figure out what kind of agreements they can have with you. Okay, let me look for into Monse. I have a question. As a social worker, do you have to request training for restorative justice, or is this something all social workers implement? No. I like the idea of restorative justice because I don't, I'm very, okay, that's how I like to describe it, but sometimes people take it wrongly. I'm very disciplinarian oriented. I have high standards, but I'm supported. And when I work at this high school that was at risk, I was known to handle the kids who were pretty tough, and I somehow, and I'm a tiny person, like I can barely go, I'm 5'1", and I'm little. But it was very interesting how the high school kids were like all over here and twice my size, and they responded to that. And they respond to not being fearful or scared or whatever. And I just liked it. And then I pushed for I want to practice that. I want to know. And I went to workshops, like things like that I just did. There's people, overall doing things like that. And I was like, I want more training. So, and then I was able to talk to a charter school, the one that I'm currently working, that they believe in restorative justice. And we talked about, if I'm going to work with you, you're going to send me to a training. And they agree, and they had think about that because the principal did not want to deal with discipline and did not like to suspend people and all that. So I went, and then I got a training. It's not required, no, you have to push for it. And then also I am curious about restorative justice in cases of domestic abuse. How do you empower those who have been harmed long periods of time? Okay, so for domestic violence, it's I would not venture about addressing that because it's a different dynamic, and Rosita talked about she was the director of domestic violence shelter and stuff like that, and she can talk a little bit about it. But what I will say from the restorative practice is work with the person who's receiving the harm, right? That you are going to empower that person. That's how can you use restorative justice, that you're not just a victim, you have power, and you can demand what you need and use a different perspective. Now, you also have to work with the abusers, because sometimes people just focus on this, and we don't train and work with the abusers, because they're how they're going to change and how they're going to build a relationship again, if not the way it is. Rosita, you want to talk to if restorative justice regarding domestic violence?
I right now, with not being trained proficiently in restorative justice, I would say I would not do it. Like as a clinician, I would not do it. And I think we want to think about, when we're talking about restorative justice, we're talking about, and like you said that in the presentation, it's not excusing people's behavior. It's not being passive about it. It's about people coming together and willing to take accountability. So if somebody's going to just play the victim and manipulate and all of those things, that's part of being an abuser, then I have a problem with restorative justice, because it's really not the model that's going to address it. Like both parties have to come in good faith and say and own what you did. Like what was, like, that's the accountability part. And so, my work with domestic violence is, I mean, not that it wouldn't work, but I feel like it would take a lot of hands on deck and really holding people accountable, and not just making excuses and letting people play the victim. Like that just doesn't work. Like people can talk really well and sound like they like this system hurt them, but they're really not taking any accountability and they're just playing a victim role.
Yeah,
Thank you.
so I don't know about domestic violence. I did any training. They don't talk about it. I don't know if this idea will fit. But you can always work separately and work on empowerment, right? And then trying to work with the abusers on accountability and a different thing. And then if ever gets a safe place where people can come together, so then I guess you could. And then you also say, how do you aid a moderator to get them to speak up with what they need? Do you have repeated sessions? Go ahead.
Yeah, that was kind of part of the same question. So I think you answered it. I was just kind of concerned because like I know the whole point of the circle is so that we're all in like the kind of same playing field and no one's like in power. But if those like power dynamics already exist, how do you destroy that to where it's like where people want to advocate for themselves? But yeah, I can see where you guys like it gets a complicated process and probably takes many sessions or maybe even different techniques.
Yeah, because part of restorative justice and practices and training is you have to talk with the people, the parties before meeting, because you have to evaluate whether they're ready to take accountability, because you don't want any more harm, right? You don't want the session to be. And one of the things that people do too, so they talked and they figure out, are you ready or not ready? If you're not ready, it's not going to happen because you don't want to do any more harm. You don't want to create more conflict. But another thing that they do is they make a meal. So everybody comes and there's food. See how the indigenous idea culture comes from? There's food and people are sharing food. They're eating and drinking before the meeting starts. And this is purposeful. It's to create some, to not be like, okay, I'm coming here. No, you come, you drink hot coffee, some cookies, some other type of meals. We are sharing, we are like relaxing, and then we come together. But there's always like some food before getting together in there. I forgot to mention that. And then Javi said, have another commitment. Okay, thank you. Thank you. So if there's no
Bueno, I think we reached the end of the time, and I know that these things can get complicated in different ways. We can go overboard and it gets difficult. But I have to say that that this was a very good presentation, Cecy. Thank you for teaching us about this thing. I think that in many different ways, knowing that this comes from indigenous people, I think that in different respects, you know, many of us are getting back to creating those circles, and part of this educational opportunities is for us to realize that a lot of the solutions already exist within our communities. No, this is not new. It's just that. But I would like to leave this this talk with the larger question. No, how do we do restorative justice at the community level? No. The reason why I'm saying that is because think about it. right now, the plight in the political spectrum in the United States is happening for many different reasons, but one of them is because diversity is increasing, and minorities are actually becoming a majority, no? And so I'm very interested in all of this, because to me the question has always been, no, what kind of a future are we going to build for our kids? And being that our kids are going to, I mean, I think it was my niece who told me that the 13% of a big chunk of the population under this act is people of 13 years of age. Well, guess what? Those kids are actually kids of color. And to be more exact, a lot of them are actually Mexicano, Chicano kids, no? So being that the future, it seems to me that the future will bring a whole lot more diversity, and Caucasians are not going to, continue being the superpower. Then how do we approach this in a humane way, in a way that we can restore justice for our community, and in a way that we don't become perpetrators of ourselves, meaning that we don't become a large group of a big population of people who will actually withstand the practices of the past. And I will say that if we're not careful, we could actually end up doing exactly that, no? Becoming perpetrators of ourselves in the future. And so how do we use restorative justice to break away from prejudice, no? And being the prejudice and hate and all of that is actually, that's where a lot of these things come. So thank you, Cecy. This is very informative. We will continue to push this idea of circles and councils and bring back our communities. And so, I pose that question because everybody in their own quarters, we have to think about that, so we can, as members of a group that is in the rise, we can actually bring something more positive to this country than very negative practices that will not help anybody. So I want to leave it at that, but I want to thank everybody. I want to thank Cecy, Rosita for accepting to do this for us, Lauren and Adriana for all the work that they put in to make this happen, and each and every one of you for taking the time out on your Friday night to listen to Cecy.
Thank you. And I put the questions there, so they're recording, and those questions can be copied in case that you want to think, oh, what was the questions? How do you frame? I just wanted to put that. And thank you. Thank you again.
Well, is there going to be a poll, Lauren, like to get feedback?
Yes, there is the poll. If you guys can do it, just take a few seconds here.
How do you access the poll?
How you exit? You just said.
Just do it on the chat.
No, you should be able to see the poll. Don't you see it on your screen?
Is Jorge one of the leaders?
Oh, okay.
At least then he can't take the poll.
I see. That's true.
Muy bien.
There, Jorge, maybe you can see it now.
Yeah. Okay. Alicia, good to see you, Alicia.
Hi.
Hopefully things will get better and we can get back to get ourselves dirty in the dance floor and do some danza again. Okay?